The message came on a Tuesday, not through the Unified Earth Council's diplomatic frequency, not through the military's secured relay network, not through any of the 17 official channels humanity had registered with the Galactic Concord over the last 40 years of cold, grinding, almost war. It came through a civilian weather satellite, Beacon Station Mira 7, registered to an agricultural monitoring cooperative on the coast of what used to be called Portugal, received a tight beam signal at 3:14 in the morning, local time. The satellite's automated system flagged it as debris scatter, logged it, and moved on. It took a junior technician named Pedro Alves 6 hours to notice the flag, 2 more hours to realize the scatter pattern was not scatter at all, and 30 seconds to understand that he was looking at something that would either end his career or define it. He called his supervisor. His supervisor called the Council's communications office. The Council's communications office called Admiral Yara Voss at home. She was already awake. Yara read the message 3 times at her kitchen table before she poured her coffee. She read it the way she read everything that mattered, not for what it said, but for what it chose not to say. The Galactic Concord, representing 14 sovereign species of the known galaxy, formally invited the United Earth Council to a summit of peace and mutual understanding, to be held at Concord Station Verath, in neutral space, in 30 days. The message was polite, precise, warm, even, in the way that very cold things sometimes appear warm from a distance. She put it down and looked out her window at the city still sleeping below her. The harbor lights were on. A supply freighter was moving through the channel, slow and heavy with something. She drank her coffee. Then she opened her personal terminal and pulled up a list she had been quietly keeping for 11 years, 14 names on it, 14 species, or civilizations or governments that had received an invitation to a Concord summit in the last century. She counted the ones that still existed as independent entities. 6. She finished her coffee, got dressed, and went to work. The council chamber held 31 people. It was designed to hold 60, but 3 seats had been empty since the Kepler incident, and the rest had never been filled in the years since, because filling them felt like something nobody was ready to admit yet. Yara stood at the front of the room and let them read it themselves first. She had learned long ago that telling people what a thing meant before they had read it themselves was the fastest way to make them stop listening to you. She watched their faces. Counselor Ben, from the Mars settlements, went through hope and suspicion in about 4 seconds and landed somewhere in the middle. Secretary General Priya Anand read slowly, the way she always did, her lips barely moving. The military liaisons from the outer colonies read it once and immediately looked at each other. A peace summit, Anand said, when most of them had finished. That's what it says, Yara said. After 40 years. Yes. After the Kepler blockade, after the Cassini exclusion zone, after everything. After all of that, Yara said, yes. Ben leaned forward. He was a big man, built like the kind of person who had grown up somewhere with higher gravity and more need to be stubborn about it. So, they blinked, he said. Finally, the pressure worked. The economic exclusion, the colony expansions, I want to show you something first, Yara said. She pulled up the delivery method on the main screen, the weather satellite, the civilian beacon, the agricultural cooperative. She let them look at it. They sent this through a potato farmer's orbital relay, she said. Not a diplomatic frequency, not military, not even a commercial channel we'd registered with them. A potato farmer. The room was quiet for a moment. Could be a technical error, someone said from the back. It's not, Yara said. She said it the way she said things she was certain about, which was without emphasis, without force, without anything extra at all. They know every frequency we have. They've known them for decades. They chose this one. They chose it because it's the lowest status channel a civilization can receive a message on. It's the galactic equivalent of sliding a note under the door instead of knocking. Anand looked up from the message. You think it's deliberate? I think everything they do is deliberate, Yara said, and I think we should go. That caused the noise she expected. Half the room talking at once, cross conversations, Ben's voice rising above the others, someone near the windows saying something about traps, and someone else saying something about opportunity, and the 2 words crashing into each other somewhere in the middle of the room. Yara waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned it in places where the alternative to waiting was dying. When the noise dropped, she spoke again. I think it might be genuine, she said. I think there are people inside the Concord who want real peace. I think there are also people inside the Concord who want to use a peace summit to get our leadership off Earth and in one room while they move assets into position. She paused. I think both of those things can be true at the same time. I think we should treat both of them as true at the same time. Anand looked at her steadily. Meaning what exactly? Meaning we go, Yara said. We go and we mean every word we say. Every offer we make honestly. Every hand we extend genuinely. We want peace. We have always wanted peace. She looked around the room. And we prepare for every word they mean. Silence. You're talking about the contingency drawer, Ben said. I'm not talking about anything by name in this room, Yara said. I'm talking about being the kind of people who go to a peace summit hoping it works and ready for it not to. Both things. No contradiction. Anand looked down at the message again. 30 days, she said. They want us rushed, Yara said. 30 days is not enough time to prepare diplomatically. It is also not enough time to prepare militarily, by conventional thinking. She let that land. We should start both processes tonight. The vote was 19-12 in favor of attending. The 12 who voted against were not wrong. Yara had read the same history they had. She knew what the odds looked like. She voted yes anyway, because she had also read the history of what happened to species that never showed up, never tried, never put a hand out even knowing someone might bite it. Those species were usually footnotes. She did not intend to be a footnote. The next 3 weeks were 2 separate wars happening in the same building. The diplomatic team assembled in the council's East Wing, Yara heading the delegation, Secretary Mara Holt as lead treaty analyst, 4 specialist advisors covering economics, biology, territorial law, and translation. They worked 18-hour days. They read every record of every previous Concord summit. They mapped the Concord's internal factions, identified which species wanted what, built profiles on the known negotiators they'd likely face across the table. Mara was the one who found the legal trap on day 4. She had been reading through the Concord's Charter for Associated Civilizations, a document that was publicly available and publicly boring, which was why it was publicly available, when she found a clause in subsection 7, Article 19, paragraph 3, that defined summit participants as existing under Concord procedural law for the duration of their attendance. She read it twice. She read it a third time with a cup of cold tea going cold in her hand. Then she found 6 other clauses that connected to it, chained together across 3 different documents, that together meant the following. Any civilization that attended a Concord summit and signed any document, including the agenda, including the welcome itinerary, was legally classified under Concord Charter as a provisional associated state for the duration of negotiations, which meant that anything they agreed to at the table was binding under Concord law, which meant the terms they'd be offered wouldn't be an offer, they'd be a reclassification. Mara brought it to Yara at 11 at night. She set a single printed page on the desk, sat down in the chair across from it, and said, "I found something." Yara read it. She did not say anything for a long time. "How long did it take you to find this?" she asked. 6 hours, Mara said, buried in 3 separate documents, each one referencing the others in footnotes. How long would it take someone who wasn't looking for it? Never, Mara said. If you're not looking for it, you don't find it. You sign the agenda, you sit down, and 6 weeks later, you're a protectorate. Yara looked at the page. They've done this before. 3 times, Mara said. That I can confirm. Probably more. Yara set the page down. Fix it, she said. Build us a counter framework. Something we bring to the table on day 1 before any documents are signed. Make it look like a procedural preference, not a counter move. Mara nodded. She picked up the page and walked out, already thinking, In the West Wing, which had no windows and a different security clearance, Commander Ren Sol ran the other war. Yara never visited the West Wing during those 3 weeks. She did not need to. She and Ren had worked together for 9 years, and she trusted him the way you trust a person who has never once needed to tell you they were trustworthy. What she knew, he was moving pieces. Slowly, quietly. Nothing that looked like a fleet mobilization, because a fleet mobilization would be noticed, and being noticed was the thing they could not afford. Small ships, civilian registered, freight corridors, repositioning under cover of ordinary commerce. What she did not know, and did not ask, exactly where those pieces would end up. That was the deal they had made with each other and with themselves. She carried the hope, he carried the contingency. Neither one contaminated the other. She needed to be able to sit across from alien diplomats and mean it when she said she wanted peace. She needed that to be true. It was true. It was also true that Ren's ships were moving. On day 28, Yara packed a single bag. She had done this before, traveled light for things that might go long, brought only what she could carry if running became necessary. She packed 2 dress uniforms, 3 sets of civilian clothes, a translation tablet, a small photograph of her sister's children, and a book she had been trying to finish for 3 years, and suspected she never would. She stood in her apartment for a moment before she left. It was a good apartment. View of the harbor. Not much furniture because she was never there long enough to miss it. She looked at the harbor lights one more time. Then she picked up her bag and went down to the transport. The shuttle lifted at 0600. Yara sat in the forward section with the diplomatic team. Mara had documents spread across 3 seats. The specialist advisors were talking quietly. Outside the viewport, the city fell away. Then the coastline. Then the curve of the planet itself. Yara watched Earth get smaller. She had done this before, left it behind, gone out into the dark toward something that might kill her, or her people, or both. She had done it at Kepler. She had done it at the Cassini line. She had done it in a dozen places that did not have famous names, that had only coordinates and casualty counts. She always watched the planet get smaller. She had never been able to stop herself. The blue arc of it, the white cloud spiral over what used to be the Pacific, the absolute ordinary beauty of a thing just existing, not knowing it was being watched, not performing anything for anyone. She watched it until it was a marble. She watched it until it was a star. She watched it until it was nothing she could distinguish from any other light. Then she turned around and opened her briefing files and started reading. 30 days. They had been invited to a peace summit. She intended to find out which kind. In the West Wing back on Earth, Ren received the single encrypted transmission from the shuttle as it cleared orbit. One word, prearranged, no context needed. He read it, nodded once to himself, and turned back to his screens. The word was, moving. He had already known, but it was good to confirm. He picked up a stylus and began marking positions on a star chart. Nothing dramatic. Just a man doing careful work in a room with no windows, moving small things into places where they might matter later. Outside, somewhere above the clouds, a shuttle full of people who meant every word they were about to say climbed toward a station that had been expecting something very different. That gap, between what was expected and what was coming, was the only weapon that had ever reliably worked. Ren capped his stylus. He was ready. They were all ready. The question was only whether they'd need to be. He looked at the star chart, at the small marks he'd made, at the distances between them and the station called Verath, where in 29 days his admiral would sit across a table from 14 alien species and try, genuinely, honestly, without performance or pretense, to find a way to peace. He hoped she'd find it. He prepared as though she wouldn't. Both things. No contradiction. Outside the window, the one the West Wing didn't have, the one he was imagining, the stars were doing what they always did. They were just there, waiting, indifferent to the plans of anyone moving through them. Ren had never minded that. He had always found the indifference of the universe clarifying. It did not care what happened. That meant it was entirely up to them. He turned back to his work. Concord Station Verath was beautiful the way a very expensive trap is beautiful. It hung in neutral space between 2 unremarkable star systems, enormous and deliberate, built from a dark composite material that caught light and held it in slow, shifting patterns across its hull. From a distance it looked almost organic, like something that had grown rather than been constructed. Up close, through the shuttle's forward viewport, Yara could see the geometry of it, the nested rings, the docking spires, the observation galleries running along its equator like a belt of glass. It was designed to impress. It was doing its job. 14 species built that together, one of the specialist advisors said from behind her. His name was Tomas, and he handled territorial law and tended to say things out loud that other people kept to themselves. 14 species were made to pay for it, Mara said, without looking up from her documents. Check the construction records. 11 of the 14 were assessed at above-market contribution rates. 3 species, Vreth, Doran, and Ilkari, paid below cost, founding member privilege. Tomas looked at her. You read the construction records. I read everything, Mara said. She turned a page. Yara watched the station grow in the viewport and said nothing. She was noting the docking assignments. Their berth was on the outer ring, far from the station's central hub, far from the diplomatic galleries and the assembly halls. Protocol, they would be told, rotation schedule, availability. It was none of those things. The outer ring was where you put ships you didn't want near anything important. She filed it and kept her face easy. They were met at the docking bay by a Concord protocol officer, a species called the Senu, small, pale, trilaterally symmetrical, moving with the precise, careful steps of something that had evolved in narrow spaces. The protocol officer's name, translated into something human mouths could manage, came out approximately as Veth. Veth was polite, efficient. Every word out of Veth's translated speech was correct, technically warm, and specifically calibrated to remind the human delegation at every turn of the distance between what they were and what they were being graciously received as. Welcome to Verath Station, Veth said. The Concord is honored by your attendance. Attendance, not presence, not participation. Attendance, like they had shown up to watch something happen, rather than take part in it. Yara smiled. We're glad to be here. She meant it. The human delegation's quarters were in a section of the station that had been specifically prepared for them. This was presented as consideration. The atmospheric composition adjusted, the gravity tuned to Earth standard. The lighting spectrum shifted toward the wavelengths human eyes preferred. What it actually meant was that they were in a sealed section with its own environmental system, separate from the rest of the station's circulation. A bubble, a controlled environment that happened to double as a convenient containment unit if anyone needed it to. Yara walked through it once, slowly, noting exits, noting the locations of the environmental control panels, noting the way the corridor curved, and what that implied about what was on the other side of the wall. She unpacked her single bag. She hung the 2 dress uniforms. She put the photograph of her sister's children on the small table by the bed. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went to find out what dinner was going to be. The first dinner was a thing of considerable ambition and specific cruelty. 14 species, or their representatives, arranged around a table that was shaped in a way that didn't quite translate to any human geometric tradition. Not round, not rectangular, but something with 17 sides that kept making Yara's eye want to correct it. The seating arrangement had been determined by the Concord's protocol office, which meant it had been determined by the 3 founding member species who ran the protocol office, which meant it had been determined by people who understood exactly what a seating arrangement communicated. The human delegation sat at the table's narrowest point, the section that had the fewest seats, the smallest surface area, the lighting that didn't quite reach properly from the overhead fixtures. Not darkness, just slightly less light than everywhere else. Tomas noticed immediately, and looked like he was going to say something. Yara put her hand briefly on his arm, just briefly. He closed his mouth. She sat down at her assigned seat, looked at the food that was placed in front of her, something pale and structured in a way that suggested it had been alive recently and was ambivalent about the transition, and ate it. It tasted like salt and something floral and something else she had no word for. This is excellent, she said, to the Doran representative sitting nearest to her. The Doran were large, covered in a fine gray-brown down, with eyes that moved independently of each other, and a mouth that opened horizontally. The representative's name translated as something like Sur. Sur looked at her with one eye, independently of the other. You find it palatable? Very much so, Yara said. What's the preparation? The floral note, is that an herb or is it in the base protein? Sur was quiet for a moment. Then, with what Yara had learned to read as Doran's surprise, said, it is in the protein. The organism is fed on a flowering plant during the final growth stage. Very few non-Doran find it appealing. I'll want to know the name before I leave, Yara said. I want to see if we can source it. She was not performing. She was genuinely curious. That was the thing about Yara, that people expecting a military hard case always got wrong. She was curious about everything. Alien food, alien architecture, alien legal structures, alien motivations. You could not negotiate with things you did not find interesting. Sur's other eye came around to look at her. I will have the name sent to your quarters, Sur said. Thank you, Yara said. Ambassador Dale Oru arrived late. This too was not an accident. Dale Oru was Ilkari, one of the 3 founding species. Insectoid in the broad human sense of the word, though the Ilkari would have found the comparison reductive and probably offensive. Tall, dark carapace, moving with a particular fluid stillness that suggested all motion was a choice rather than a necessity. Compound eyes that caught the room's light and held it in fractured pieces. Brilliant. The files on him went back 30 years. He had brokered 4 of the Concord's last 7 major agreements, had ended 2 wars before they properly started, and had reportedly reduced a Vreth military council to stunned silence once by reciting, from memory, the exact casualty figures from a conflict they had started and officially never acknowledged. He was also, the files noted, given to a particular brand of dismissiveness toward species he had categorized as unsophisticated. He had categorized humanity as unsophisticated in a recorded address to the Ilkari Science Council 11 years ago. He had not updated that assessment in the public record since. Yara watched him enter the room. He moved to his seat, the position at the table's widest point, the best lit section, the seat that was slightly elevated because the floor there had been very subtly, very intentionally raised, and sat down with the smooth economy of something that knew exactly where it was in any given hierarchy. His compound eyes moved across the room in a sweep that took approximately 2 seconds and covered everything. They landed on Yara. She was already looking at him, already had a small, neutral smile on her face, already looked like someone who was glad to be here and meant it. He looked away first. She filed that too. Over the next 2 days, the small humiliations continued at a steady, professional pace. The human delegation was scheduled last for every speaking slot, which meant by the time Yara spoke, the room had been talking for hours, and half the representatives were in whatever state their biology defaulted to when attention flagged. The translation system assigned to the human section had a half-second delay that the other sections didn't, noticeable only if you were counting, and Yara was always counting. Mealtimes were announced to all delegations simultaneously, but the human quarters were the farthest from the dining hall, which meant arriving slightly late and finding the best seats already taken, always slightly, never enough to formally complain about. Tomas, by day 2, was vibrating at a frequency Yara could feel from across the room. "It's deliberate," he said, in their quarters that evening, door sealed. "Every single one of these things is deliberate." "Yes," Yara said. "We should say something." "We will," Yara said, "when it costs them something to hear it." She poured him a cup of the coffee they'd brought from Earth. Real coffee, not whatever the station's dispensers produced. And he took it, and sat down and breathed. "You're not angry," he said. Not quite an accusation, more like confusion. "I'm very angry," Yara said. "I'm just not spending it yet." Mara spent the first 2 days appearing to do very little. This was a skill she had developed over 20 years of treaty work, the ability to look like a person who was organizing papers and checking fonts while actually conducting a systematic survey of every structural detail, access point, maintenance corridor, and environmental control system in a given facility. She walked the halls. She smiled at protocol officers. She photographed nothing with anything that looked like a camera. The lenses were in her glasses. She had worn glasses since she was 9 years old. Nobody ever looked at the glasses. By end of day 2, she had a complete map of the human delegation's section, the 2 corridors adjacent to it, the location of the nearest emergency environmental override, and 3 maintenance hatches that opened onto a service corridor running along the station's inner ring. She added this to her document files under a folder labeled Font Reference Archive and went to bed. On the morning of day 3, before formal sessions began, Veth, the protocol officer, arrived at the human quarters with a data tablet and a carefully constructed smile. "A preliminary document," Veth said. "Standard summit procedure, an agenda confirmation, and logistical outline for the formal negotiation sessions." Mara was standing at the back of the room. She did not move toward the tablet. She watched Yara take it, and she watched Yara's face do nothing at all, and she knew what was on it before Yara handed it back to her. The agenda document. The thing that, if signed, would quietly reclassify humanity as a provisional associated state under Concord procedural law before a single negotiation had begun. Mara took the tablet. She looked at it for exactly as long as it would take someone to read an agenda, and no longer. "We'll need a small adjustment to the session timing in item 4, she said, "and I have a formatting preference for the header block on multilateral documents that I should send over. Could I have the editable version?" Veth paused. A very small pause. The kind that meant a recalibration was happening behind a face being kept carefully still. "Of course," Veth said. "I'll have the editable file sent to your terminal." "Thank you," Mara said. She smiled the smile of a woman who cared about formatting. Veth left. Mara set the tablet down. She looked at Yara. "Subsection 7, she said. "I know," Yara said. "We'll need to have the counter framework ready before anyone signs anything." "How long do you need?" Mara thought about it for approximately 2 seconds. "I have it. I built it on the ship." Yara looked at her. Not for the first time, she had the thought that the most dangerous person in any room was almost never the one who looked like it. "Don't present it yet," Yara said. "Let them think we haven't found it. Give it 2 more days." Mara nodded. She picked up the tablet and went back to her documents. The formal negotiation sessions began on day 3 afternoon. The room for them was large, well lit, shaped in the Concorde's 17-sided geometry. Each delegation had a table segment. Translators ran simultaneously through earpieces. The air was set to a temperature that was comfortable for the majority of species present, and slightly cool for humans, which was probably not an accident. Dale Oru opened the session. His translated voice was precise and measured, with a quality Yara's ear kept wanting to call musical. He outlined the Concorde's vision for a new era of galactic cooperation. He used words like stability and mutual benefit and shared futures. He was good. He was very good. When it was humanity's turn to speak, Yara stood up. She did not have notes. "Thank you," she said. "We came here because we want peace. Not the kind of peace that is really one side accepting the other side's terms, but actual peace. The kind that's still standing in 50 years because it was built on something true." She paused. "We're ready to work hard for that. We think you are too. Let's find out." The room was quiet for a moment. Dale Oru looked at her. One of his expressions, she had been learning to read Ilkari facial movement from files, knowing she'd need it, shifted into something she didn't have a word for yet. She sat down. Tomas leaned over. "Short," he whispered. "Enough," she said. That night, in the service corridor Mara had mapped behind the 3rd maintenance hatch, a Concorde security officer in a technician's uniform placed a listening device behind a coolant conduit at approximately the height of a human head. He was back in his section of the station within 6 minutes. 11 minutes after that, a man named Corporal Dev Anant, listed on the station's manifest as a junior kitchen worker from the human delegation's support staff, found it. He did not remove it. He took a photograph with his own lenses, which were not in his glasses because he didn't wear glasses. They were in his left eye, which had been replaced after Kepler Station with something better than what he'd been born with. He walked back to the kitchen, finished his shift, and sent a single compressed file to a relay point that forwarded it to a receiver that was not on the station. Yara was briefed at 0200. She sat at the small table in her quarters, in the low light, with the photograph of her sister's children visible at the edge of her vision. She read the file. She looked at the photograph of the device, its placement, its angle, aimed exactly at where conversations would happen in the corridor that connected the human quarters to the main passage. She thought for a while. Then she made a decision that was either very smart or very committed to a direction she had already been moving in. She did not remove the device. She went back to bed, and in the morning she had a conversation in that corridor with Tomas about the weather on the Martian northern plateau, which was something she had genuinely been meaning to ask him about for days. She also, later, had a different conversation in the same corridor, and she chose every word of it carefully, and what she chose was the truth, because the truth was currently the best weapon she had. That evening she sent the encrypted transmission. 1 word. It traveled from the station to a relay, from the relay to a point 3 systems away, from that point to a civilian freighter running a registered freight corridor toward the Verath system's outer edge. Commander Rensol read it at his screens. Yellow. He uncapped his stylus. He made 4 new marks on the star chart. The pieces moved a little closer. Not close enough to see. Not close enough to read as anything but commercial traffic on a routine course. But closer. He capped the stylus, leaned back, and looked at the ceiling of his freighter's navigation room for a moment. Somewhere ahead of him in the dark, Yara was sitting in a station with a listening device she'd chosen not to remove, eating food she'd genuinely found delicious, learning the names of alien proteins, and watching a room full of people who expected a supplicant try to figure out what they were actually dealing with. He hoped she was getting enough sleep. She wasn't. She never did, in places like this. But she would hold. She always held. Outside, the stars did what they always did. The freighter moved through them, quiet and unremarkable, carrying nothing interesting to nowhere important. That was exactly how Wren needed it to look. He turned back to his screens and kept working. The Concorde's first draft of the peace terms arrived on day 4, printed on a material that was not quite paper and not quite screen, that held text in a way that made it look permanent before anyone had agreed to anything. Yara read it at the table in the human delegation's main room, with Mara on her left and Tomas on her right, and the 4 specialist advisors arranged around the rest of the surface with their own copies. Nobody spoke for the first 20 minutes. The only sounds were the soft movement of translated pages and, once, a very quiet exhale from Tomas that communicated a considerable amount. The document was 63 pages long. It was written in the Concorde's formal diplomatic register, which was precise and structured, and moved like something that had been designed specifically to make you feel that disagreeing with it was a personal failure of intelligence. The translation was excellent, which meant the humans could read exactly how thoroughly they were being asked to fold. Yara finished it, set it down, and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Summary," she said. Tomas had been waiting for this. He had his notes already organized. Territorial. Humanity cedes formal claim to the 7 contested systems along the Cassini corridor, accepts Concorde jurisdiction over commercial traffic in those systems, and agrees to a 50-year moratorium on expansion beyond current colony boundaries. He paused. Economic. All trade with non-Concorde species requires Concorde licensing and a 12% transit fee. Military. Earth's defense forces are reclassified as a Concorde-associated security body, which means our deployments require Concorde authorization beyond a defined perimeter. He stopped. "That's the polite version," Yara said. "Yes." "Say the other version." Tomas looked at his notes, then set them down. "They want us contained, taxed, and asking permission to defend ourselves." The room was quiet. "They dressed it up well," Mara said. She had her copy open to a specific page. The language in Section 8 is actually quite elegant. If you read it fast, the military reclassification sounds like a mutual defense arrangement. It's only when you cross-reference it with the perimeter definition in Appendix C that you realize the perimeter is drawn around Earth and its 3 nearest colonies. Everything else is outside it. So if a colony beyond that perimeter is attacked, one of the specialists said. "We would need Concorde authorization to respond," Mara said, "which would need to be voted on by the full council, which includes the species most likely to be doing the attacking." The specialist sat back. "Right," he said. Yara stood up. She walked to the viewport. The human quarters had one, small, looking out at the station's outer ring and the dark beyond it. She looked at the dark for a moment. "How much of this is real positioning, and how much is an opening bid?" she asked. "The territorial terms are an opening bid," Tomas said. "The military reclassification is not." "Agreed," Yara said. She turned around. "That's the one they actually want. That's the door they're trying to walk us through." She looked at Mara. "The agenda document, the provisional state language, the military perimeter. They all connect." "Yes," Mara said. "If you sign the agenda document, you're already a provisional associated state before negotiations begin. If you then agree to the military reclassification in the treaty, you've formalized it. You're not a sovereign civilization anymore. You're a member body under Concorde jurisdiction, with a 50-year moratorium on expansion so we can't grow our way out of it," Tomas said. "And a transit tax so we can't fund our way out of it," one of the specialists added. The room was very quiet again. Yara looked at them. She looked at the faces around the table, tired, focused, not broken. None of them broken. "Here's what's also true," she said. "The territorial terms have movement in them. The trade structure has workable alternatives if you strip out the transit fee and replace it with a flat-rate commercial agreement. There are 3 species on that council who would benefit from open trade with humanity More than they'd benefit from the tax revenue. She paused. There are people in that room who want a real agreement. Not all of them, but some. How do you know? Tomas asked. Because if they only wanted to trap us, they didn't need to invite us here, she said. They could have moved on the colonies while we were negotiating and presented us with a fait accompli. They haven't done that. She thought about the fleet data Ren was watching. As of this morning, no unusual Concord military movements. That means something. She sat back down. We counter, she said. Everything, honestly. The territorial terms we can move on. Propose a joint administration framework for the Cassini systems, shared jurisdiction, commercial access for both sides. The trade structure we rebuild from the ground up. The military clause we reject entirely and replace with a mutual non-aggression framework that doesn't require anyone's permission to defend their own people. She looked around the table. We mean every word of it. This is not a stall. This is not maneuvering. We present these as what we actually want, because they are what we actually want. She paused. And Mara presents the counter framework for the agenda document first, before anything else gets signed. Mara nodded. She already had it ready. She had had it ready for 3 days. The counter-proposal session happened on day 5. Dale Oru sat across the table, still and composed, and read the human counter-proposal in the same silence that Yara had read the Concord's draft. She watched him read it. She watched the small adjustments in his posture that the files had taught her to associate with surprise, a slight shift in the angle of his carapace, a fractional change in the way his forearms rested on the table. He had not expected them to have read it this carefully. He had not expected the counter-proposal to be coherent. She filed this without pleasure. It was not a victory. It was information. Mara presented the agenda document counter-framework first, as planned. She did it with the energy of a person making a minor administrative correction, a quiet, almost apologetic description of a procedural preference for a different document header that happened, as a side effect, to route the entire summit outside of Concord provisional state jurisdiction and establish it instead under a mutually agreed neutral framework. She smiled pleasantly through all of it. The Concord's legal advisor, a Senyu named Ash, who was very good and had realized what was happening approximately halfway through Mara's presentation, went absolutely still. Dale Oru did not look at Ash. He looked at Mara, then he looked at Yara. Yara looked back at him with the expression of a person who was here to find peace and meant it. There was a recess called for administrative review. It lasted 4 hours. When they came back, the Concord's delegation had a new version of the agenda document that no longer contained the provisional state language. Nobody mentioned the old version. Nobody explained the change. The new document was presented as a formatting update. Mara accepted it with a smile and a note about the header font. Real negotiation, when it finally started, was a different kind of exhausting. Not the exhausting of sitting in a room being quietly diminished, the exhausting of two intelligent sides trying to find the shape of something that didn't exist yet, feeling along the edges of it in the dark, occasionally finding a piece that fit. The Cassini corridor took 2 full days of sessions. The human delegation proposed joint administration. The Concord countered with Concord-led administration with human advisory rights. Humanity countered with equal seat joint council with rotating chair. The Concord came back with equal seat joint council with Concord veto on security matters. Humanity countered with mutual veto, neither side able to unilaterally authorize military action in the corridor. At the end of day 6 they had something, not perfect, not what either side had started with, something that 2 sides could both explain to their people without lying about what they'd gotten. Tomas thought it was better than he'd expected. Yara thought it was real. That mattered more to her than better. The trade framework took 1 day. Mara and Ash, the Concord's legal advisor, negotiated most of it directly, sitting at a side table while the main session continued around them. They were an interesting pair. Mara, with her documents spread everywhere, speaking in the precise, friendly tones of someone who had been doing this for 20 years, and Ash, who was quiet and fast, and had stopped underestimating Mara approximately 3 hours into their first exchange. By end of day 6, they had stripped out the transit fee and replaced it with a flat commercial access agreement that gave humanity open trade rights with all 14 Concord species and gave the Concord reciprocal access to human commercial networks. 3 Concord species, the ones Yara had identified as trade-motivated, voted yes on the framework before the session formally closed. That was 2 of humanity's 4 core demands. Real ones, solid ones, the kind that would still be standing in 50 years. Yara, walking back to the human quarters that evening, felt something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, but lived in the same neighborhood. A thing you could only feel if you had genuinely wanted something, and genuinely worked for it, and genuinely gotten some of it. She let herself feel it for the length of the corridor. Then she went inside, and Mara was waiting at the table with a look on her face that brought Yara back to the present with a sharpness that felt like a step onto cold ground. "The listening device," Mara said. "What about it?" "Someone came back to it today, during the recess." Mara set a small data chip on the table. "Devenant's report. They didn't replace it. They added a secondary transmitter to it. Longer range." Yara looked at the chip. "Who came back to it? Concord Security?" "Dev says it wasn't standard Concord Security uniform. The insignia was different." Mara paused. "Vreth." Yara was quiet for a moment. The Vreth were one of the 3 founding species. The ones who had paid below cost for the station's construction. The ones with the most to lose if humanity negotiated its way to something real. "They're running their own surveillance separate from the Concords," Yara said. "Separate from Dale Oru's operation," Mara said. Yes. This was the line that mattered. The Concord was not one thing. It was 14 species with 14 sets of interests, and some of those interests were not served by a real peace with humanity, and some of those interests were. Dale Oru, brilliant and dismissive and across the table from her every day, wanted something from this summit. She still didn't know exactly what, but she knew it wasn't the same thing the Vreth wanted. "Don't touch it," Yara said. "Still? Still," she thought. "Start having certain conversations near it. Specific ones. I want the Vreth to know things." "What things?" Yara told her. Mara listened. When Yara finished, she sat with it for a moment, then said, "That's either very good, or we've committed to a direction we can't walk back from." "Yes," Yara said. "Okay," Mara said. She picked up her documents. "I'll want the wording to sound natural." "It will be natural," Yara said. "It'll be true." She sent the transmission that night. One word, the ladder going up another step. Orange. Ren received it on the freighter. He read it, set down his coffee, and pulled up the star chart. He looked at the marks he'd made over the last 6 days. He made new ones, and the new ones were closer to Verath Station than the old ones had been, and they were positioned in a way that any Concord sensor sweep running a standard military scan would not find interesting. A commercial freighter here, a registered mining survey vessel there, a passenger transport on a filed route that happened to pass through a particular corridor at a particular time. Pieces. He capped the stylus. He thought about the word orange. Yellow had been, "We're here, it's what we expected, we're steady." Orange was different. Orange was, "Something has shifted, the temperature is up, stay close." He stayed close. Outside, the stars held their positions, indifferent as always. The freighter moved through them on its registered route, a piece of commercial traffic going somewhere unremarkable. Ren looked at the chart for a long time. Then he picked up his coffee, found it had gone cold, and drank it anyway. He had slept 4 hours in the last 2 days. He would sleep when it was over. Until then, there was the chart, and the pieces on it, and the one person he was responsible for bringing home, who was 3 systems away, in a station full of people who were running 2 different games, and thought they were running one. He made one more mark on the chart. Then another. The pieces moved. Nobody, looking at any one of them, would see anything worth looking at. That was the point. That had always been the point. He set down his cup and went back to work. The sensor report came in at 0847 during the morning session's 2nd hour. Yara was mid-sentence when her earpiece gave the single low tone that meant Ren had pushed something to her personal channel. She finished the sentence. She made a note on her document. She waited for a natural pause in the session. Dale Oru was responding to Tomas on the mutual non-aggression clause, a point of genuine contention they had been working through for 2 days, and she looked down at her wrist terminal under the table. 11 words, no preamble. 3 Vreth cruiser-class vessels. Verath system outer boundary. Filed as routine patrol. She read it twice. She looked up. Dale Oru was still speaking. His translated voice moved through the room in its precise, measured way. The other delegations were listening with varying degrees of attention. The Senu protocol officers stood at their stations along the wall. The lighting was the same as it had been every morning. The air was the same temperature it had been every morning, slightly cooler than humans preferred. Everything looked exactly the same as it had yesterday. Yara set her wrist terminal face down on the table. She picked up her tea, which had been sitting for 20 minutes, and was not quite cold, but was not warm either, and she drank it. She thought about 11 Vreth-Semitic civilizations, 6 of which still existed as independent entities. She thought about Mara's font reference archive, and Dev Anant's replaced I, and the 3:14 a.m. signal on a Portuguese weather satellite, and the photograph of her sister's children on the table by her bed. She thought about 2 of 4 demands, real ones, solid ones, the kind that would still be standing in 50 years. She set the cup down. Dale Oru finished his point. The session moved. Yara made a counter-argument on the non-aggression clause that was measured and precise and genuine, because she still meant every word she said at this table, and she would mean every word she said at this table until the table stopped being a place where words meant anything. It was not that yet. She intended to keep it from becoming that for as long as possible. By the afternoon session, she had the full picture from Ren. 3 Vreth cruisers, cruiser class, combat configuration. Not a patrol configuration. The sensor profile was wrong for patrol. The energy signatures were wrong for patrol. The positioning was wrong for patrol. They were sitting at the system's outer boundary in a triangle formation that had one purpose, and one purpose only: interdiction. They were not there to patrol the system. They were there to make sure nothing left it without their say. Specifically, nothing human-crewed. Ren's message was precise about this. He had cross-referenced the formation with 16 other instances of Vreth military positioning in the last 40 years, and the match was consistent. This was a specific Vreth tactical posture with a specific name in their military doctrine. The name translated, roughly, as the closing of a hand. Yara read it in the corridor outside the session room, standing with her back to the wall, reading from her terminal with the expression of someone reviewing a schedule. Tomas came out after her. He read her face, not the expression on it, but the thing beneath the expression, which he had learned to read over the last 6 days. "What?" he said quietly. "Go back inside," she said. "Sit down. Keep working on the non-aggression clause, the wording in Article 3, Section 2. Push for the broader defensive perimeter definition. It matters." "Yara." "It matters," she said. "Go." He looked at her for one more second. Then he went back inside. She stood in the corridor a moment longer. She was angry. She wanted to be clear about that to herself. She was genuinely, fully angry. The kind of anger that came from having tried something real and having it met with this. The kind of anger that had texture and weight to it. She let herself feel it for the length of 3 breaths. Then she filed it away in the same place she kept everything she couldn't spend yet, and she went back into the session room and sat down and kept working. It broke open on day 7 morning. Not gradually, not through a building series of pointed exchanges. It broke the way things break when one side decides the pretense has served its purpose and stops maintaining it. The Vreth delegation's lead representative, a figure who had been largely silent through the previous day's sessions, present but peripheral, watching, stood up. His name translated as something that came out in human mouths, as Vren. He was tall, even for Vreth, which meant he was tall by any species measure, with the heavy-plated build of his kind and eyes that were a very pale yellow and moved in his face with a flat, deliberate quality, like something that had decided long ago that looking was a tool rather than a reflex. He waited until the room was looking at him. "The Vreth Coalition," he said, through the translation system, in a voice that was perfectly level, "wishes to address the matter of humanity's compliance with Concord Association terms before this session proceeds further." The room shifted. Yara felt it, the particular quality of stillness that descends on a space when something true has finally been said out loud. Dale Oru's posture changed, a small change, the angle of his carapace, the way his forearms moved on the table. Yara had been reading him for 6 days. This was not the change of a person who had been expecting this. He hadn't known. She filed it. Vren continued. "The Vreth Coalition's position is that the current negotiation framework has produced terms insufficient to Concord security requirements. In light of this, the coalition formally requests that this summit conclude under the original document structure. The original document structure, the one Mara had taken apart on day 3, the one that would have made humanity a provisional associated state before a single real term was agreed. Furthermore, Vren said, the Vreth Coalition wishes to make clear that the delegation of the human species is currently present on this station, under Concord jurisdiction, and that their departure is subject to Coalition security review for the duration of this matter's resolution. There it was. Plain, clean, out in the open air at last. You are here. You are not leaving. You will sign what we put in front of you, or you will not leave. The room was very quiet. Yara became aware of small things. The temperature of the room, the sound of the translation system, the exact distance between her chair and the door, the fact that Mara, 3 seats to her left, had gone absolutely still in the way that Mara went still when she was thinking very fast. Dale Oru said, in a voice that carried a quality Yara had not heard from him before, something tight in it, something controlled. The Vreth Coalition's statement has not been submitted through standard session procedure. The Vreth Coalition is operating under emergency security provisions, Vren said. Article 41 of the Concord Defense Charter. Dale Oru was quiet for a moment. A long moment. Article 41, he said, requires the consensus of founding member species. The Dorun and Ilkari will be formally notified, Vren said. They will be formally consulted, Dale Oru said. There was something in the precision of that correction that told Yara more than anything else she had observed in 6 days. He had not been consulted. He had been informed, just now, same as everyone else in the room. Yara stood up. Not fast, not dramatic. She stood up the way she did everything at this table, with a deliberateness that suggested each action was chosen. Every face in the room came to her. 14 species, dozens of representatives, Vren with his flat yellow eyes, and Dale Oru with his fractured light compound gaze, and Veth, the protocol officer, rigid at the wall, and Mara 3 seats away, not moving. I want to show you something, Yara said. Her voice was level, not performing level, actually level. She reached into her document case and took out a single data slate. She had carried it with her every day of the summit, in the same case with her briefing files and her treaty drafts and the notes she took during sessions. Nobody had ever looked at it twice. It looked like everything else she carried. She set it on the table. She turned it so the display faced the room. These are human fleet positions, she said. Current, as of 40 minutes ago. The display showed a star map. Vareth system at the center. Surrounding it, distributed across 9 different coordinates at varying distances, were marked positions. Ships, not the 3 Vreth cruisers at the outer boundary, which were also marked, on a separate overlay, labeled clearly in both human and translated Concord notation, but human ships, civilian registered, filed routes, ordinary traffic. Except that ordinary traffic, when you looked at the pattern of it, was not random. It was distributed, deliberately, in a configuration that any Concord military analyst would recognize, that any species with a functioning defense doctrine would recognize. Not defending, positioned. The Vreth cruisers were inside the pattern. The Vreth home systems, 3 of them, marked in the standard notation anyone in the room could read, were not inside the pattern. They were adjacent to it, just adjacent to 3 separate human vessel positions that had been holding their coordinates for 4 days. Not aimed, not threatening, not doing anything at all that required an explanation. Just there, just already there. Yara looked at the room. We prepared for both outcomes, she said. We hoped for this one. She gestured at the table, at the documents on it, at the 6 days of genuine work that sat in those pages. We came here because we want peace, she said. We still want peace. Everything we have offered at this table, we offer now. Every word we have said, we mean. She paused. We also want to go home, and we will go home. She did not look at Vren when she said it. She looked at the room, at all of it, at the 14 species who had been watching humanity for 40 years and waiting to find out what it was. The room was quiet for a long time. Vren was looking at the star map, at the pattern of it, at the positions marked there, their spacing, their angles, the 3 coordinates adjacent to Vreth home space. His flat yellow eyes moved across it slowly. He did not speak. Nobody spoke. Yara sat back down. She reached forward and turned the data slate so it was facing her again. She picked up her pen. She looked at her treaty draft. Article 3, Section 2, she said to the room. The defensive perimeter definition. I believe Tomas was making a point about the wording when we were interrupted. Tomas looked at her. He looked like a man who had just watched something happen and was still assembling it into a coherent shape. Yes, he said, yes, the broader definition. The session continued. Bren left the room during the midday recess and did not return. An hour after that, Ren's screen showed the 3 Vreth cruisers at Verath System's outer boundary change their formation. They moved from the triangle, the interdiction posture, the closing of a hand, to a standard patrol spread. Not gone, but changed. Ren stared at the screen for a while. Then he sent a single compressed file to the civilian freighter coordinates he had been seeding across the system for the last 6 days. The file contained 2 words, stand by, not stand down, not yet, but the hand was no longer closing. He sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling of the freighter's navigation room and breathed once, slowly, the way you breathe when something has not gone wrong that you had been holding your entire body against. Then he sat forward and went back to watching the screens. That night, Dale Oru requested a private meeting, not through protocol channels, not through Veth or any of the other Concord administrative staff, through a direct message delivered to the human quarters door by Dale Oru himself, standing in the corridor in a manner that Yara, who answered the door, would later describe to no one as looking like a person who had decided something and was now living with what that decision required. She did not open the door all the way. Ambassador, she said. Admiral, he said. The translation system rendered his voice in the way it always did, precise and even, but there was something in it tonight that had not been there in 6 days of sessions, something that was not performing. Tomorrow, she said, before the session, we can use the observation gallery on the East Ring. It's open circuit, no recording devices. She had confirmed this with Mara's maps 4 days ago. 6th hour. He looked at her for a moment. His compound eyes caught the light from the corridor. 6th hour, he said. He left. Yara closed the door. She stood in the room for a moment. Mara looked up from the table. He didn't know, Yara said. I know, Mara said. That changes things. I know, Mara said. They looked at each other. Does it change what we want? Mara asked. No, Yara said. It changes what's possible. Mara nodded. She went back to her documents. Yara walked to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the photograph of her sister's children for a while. 2 of them were old enough now that they had probably changed since it was taken. The youngest one's face she could still read clearly. She thought about that face, about what it was growing up into. She thought about 2 of 4 demands, real ones. She thought about what was possible. She lay down without changing clothes, and she was asleep in 4 minutes, because she had learned in places harder than this that sleep was a discipline, and she was very disciplined. Outside the human quarters, the station breathed around her. Its systems ran their cycles. Its lights held their calibrated spectrums. In the corridor behind the 3rd maintenance hatch, a listening device sat behind a coolant conduit and transmitted, faithfully, the silence of a room where everyone was asleep. 14 human crew members were on this station. Nobody had found any of them. Devenant finished his kitchen shift, said goodnight to the Senu cook he had been working next to for 6 days, walked to his bunk in the support staff quarters, and lay down with his eyes open in the dark. His left eye, the better one, kept running its quiet background functions, the ones that didn't need him to direct them, cataloging the small data it gathered from every room it had been in that day. He stared at the ceiling. He thought about home. He thought about the freighter 3 systems away and the man on it who was watching the same dark from the other direction. He closed both eyes. He slept. Tomorrow was going to matter. He wanted to be rested for it. The observation gallery on the East Ring had no chairs. It was built for standing, for looking out at the dark through a curved band of transparent composite that ran the full length of the gallery like an unbroken eye. The stars outside were dense here, denser than they looked from Earth, because there was nothing between them and the viewport. No atmosphere, no city light, no anything. Just the dark and everything burning in it. Yara arrived first. She stood at the viewport and looked out and waited. She heard Dale Oru before she saw him. Not his footsteps, Ilkari moved quietly enough that footsteps were more suggestion than sound, but the slight change in the gallery's air circulation that happened when the door opened and closed. He came to stand beside her, not close, a respectful distance, which meant something different for Ilkari than it did for humans, but landed close enough that she understood it. They looked at the stars for a moment. "I did not know about the cruisers," he said. "I know," she said. A pause. Outside, something very far away was either dying or being born, a brightness at the edge of visibility that could have been either, that she had no way to tell from here. "How long had you been moving ships?" he asked. "We started the day we received the invitation," she said. He was quiet for a moment, the civilian frequency. "Yes." Another pause. "You understood what that meant." "We understood what it might mean," she said. "We hoped it meant something else." "And did it?" She thought about that, about the Cassini Corridor Joint Administration Framework, sitting in a document on the session table downstairs, real and imperfect and workable, about the flat commercial access agreement that Mara and Ash had built overnight 6 days ago, and that 3 species had already voted yes on, about the non-aggression clause they had been working on for 2 days, the wording not quite right yet, both sides pushing on it from different angles toward something that neither had arrived with. "Parts of it," she said. He made a sound that the translation system didn't render, a sound that existed outside its parameters, in whatever register the Ilkari used for things that were too complicated for words. "The Vreth faction has existed within the Concord for longer than most of the current member species," he said. "They were founding members. They built what this became." He paused. "They believe that what they built requires protecting at any cost." "Including us," Yara said. "Including anyone they perceive as a threat to the structure." "Are we a threat to the structure?" He was quiet for longer than she expected. "You are something the structure was not built to accommodate," he said. "That is not the same thing. But to certain minds it is close enough." Yara looked at the stars, at the brightness at the edge of visibility, still there, still impossible to name. "What do you want from this summit?" she asked. She had wanted to ask it since day one. She had waited until she had enough of him assembled to hear the answer properly. He was quiet again. Not the quiet of evasion, the quiet of precision, of a person choosing words the way you choose footholds on a difficult surface, testing each one before committing weight. "Stability," he said. "Real stability. Not the kind that comes from containing a species until it breaks outward. That kind lasts 30 years, and then it doesn't." He paused. "You have been expanding for 3 centuries. You will keep expanding. The question is not whether that happens. The question is what shape the galaxy is in when it does." Yara looked at him, at his profile against the stars, the dark carapace, the compound eyes catching the viewport's light in their fractured way. "You think a real agreement is more stable than a contained one," she said. "I think a species that contains its expansion voluntarily, because it has a genuine stake in the structure it's part of, is more stable than a species that is held down until it isn't," he said. "Yes." The Vreth disagree. "The Vreth have a different model," he said. "They have also been running it for 200 years, and it has produced 6 of 14 invited civilizations, still existing as independent entities." Yara looked at him for a moment. "You know about my list," she said. "I compiled the same list 11 years ago," he said. They stood with that for a moment. "Would you have used them?" he asked. "The ships." She looked back out at the stars, at the brightness that was either dying or being born. "I genuinely don't know," she said. "That's why it worked." The final session began at the 9th hour and ran until late in the evening. The non-aggression clause got its wording. It took 4 hours and 17 drafts, and at one point, Tomas put his pen down and looked at the ceiling and breathed through his nose for 30 seconds while Ash and Mara continued working around him. The final version was not what humanity had arrived with, and it was not what the Concord had arrived with, and it said something true that neither side had known how to say before they had spent 6 days sitting across from each other. No side would deploy military assets within the other's defined sovereign space without formal notification and a 72-hour response window. Exceptions for active defense of civilian targets, with specific parameters on what counted as active and what counted as defense. Tomas read the final version 3 times. "It's not perfect," he said. "No," Yara said. "It's real, though." "Yes," she said. "It is." He picked up his pen. The signing happened in the main session room, under the 17-sided geometry and the lights that had been slightly too cool for human comfort all week, which nobody adjusted, and which Yara had stopped noticing 3 days ago. 4 documents: the Cassini Corridor Joint Administration Framework, the Commercial Access Agreement, the Mutual Non-Aggression Clause, a 4th document that was shorter than the others, a single page, which established a permanent liaison office, Human and Concord jointly staffed, for ongoing diplomatic contact. The liaison office had been Dale Oru's addition, submitted the previous evening through proper session procedure. Yara had read it twice, and then signed the submission form and sent it back without comment, because some things did not need comment. Each lead representative signed in their species notation. Yara signed in a neat, economical hand that took about 2 seconds and contained nothing decorative. Dale Oru signed in the flowing Ilkari notation that looked like something between a diagram and a sentence. The Vreth delegation was present, Vren was not. Nobody mentioned Vren's absence. Nobody mentioned the 3 cruisers at the system boundary, which were still there, still in their patrol spread, still doing nothing in particular. Nobody mentioned a data slate or a star map or 14 human crew members that nobody had found. The documents were signed. The session closed. Veth, standing at the wall, made a notation on the official record. It was done. Mara went back to the human quarters, sat down at the table where she had spent most of the last week, and looked at her documents spread across its surface. Treaty drafts and counterproposals and legal frameworks and the font reference archive and notes in 3 different colors that she used as a system nobody else fully understood. She looked at it for a while. Then she started packing it into a case, slowly and methodically, each document in the right order, everything in its place. She found, at the bottom of one of the stacks, the first draft of the counter-framework she had built on the ship before they arrived. The one that had taken apart the provisional state language before anyone had signed anything. She looked at it. It was 8 pages, dense, precise, written in the early hours of a ship cabin while the rest of the delegation slept. She put it in the case with the others. She closed the case. She went to her bunk, lay down on top of the covers with her boots still on, and was asleep in less than 2 minutes. She dreamed about font sizes, not metaphorically. She dreamed about a specific heading font she had been arguing about internally for 3 days, whether the point size was right for the formality level of a multilateral treaty document. In the dream she changed it, and it was exactly right, and she felt the satisfaction of that completely. She slept for 16 hours. Wren got the transmission at 2200. Not a single word this time. A short file, compressed. When he opened it, it was a copy of the signed agreement, all 4 documents, in both human and Concord notation, with the official Concord seal and Yara's neat 2-second signature on each one. He read it. He read it again. Then he sent the 2-word message to the distributed positions across the system. Stand down, not stand by. Down. He watched the acknowledgments come back, one by one, from the civilian freighters and the survey vessels and the passenger transports holding their coordinates in the dark around Vareth system. Each one confirmed, filed its updated route, and began moving away on ordinary commercial courses toward ordinary destinations. Pieces returning to the board. It took 40 minutes for all of them to confirm. Wren sat in his navigation room and watched it happen, position by position, mark by mark coming off the star chart, until what remained was just the ordinary traffic of a system going about its business. He looked at the empty chart. He looked at it for a while. Then he closed it, stood up, and went to find something to eat that wasn't whatever had been in the cold coffee cup for the last 8 hours. 3 Concord species requested bilateral talks with Earth within the week. The requests came through the new liaison office, which had been established with a human attaché named Kira Sonne, who had been waiting for the posting for 2 years, and who, upon receiving the first 3 requests simultaneously on her first official day, made a sound that was not quite a word, and wrote all 3 dates into the calendar with hands that were entirely steady. The Vreth made no request. Nobody expected them to. In the galactic news services, the ones that reached the human colonies, translated and filtered through 3 layers of Concord media infrastructure, the summit was described as humanity's diplomatic breakthrough, as a new era of galactic cooperation, as evidence of the Concord's commitment to an inclusive and stable galaxy. Yara read one of these reports on the shuttle home and put it down after 2 paragraphs. Tomas, across the aisle, looked at her. Inaccurate? Incomplete, she said. She looked out the viewport. Does it matter? She thought about it. For the colonies, no. For the people who need to believe we did something real, no. She paused. For the people in that room who know exactly what happened, the ones who'll be making the next decision when this one runs out, it matters that they have an accurate picture. Dale Oru has an accurate picture, Tomas said. Yes, she said, he does. The shuttle came out of its final transit at 0600, local Earth time, on a clear morning with a low cloud layer over the eastern coast that the forecast said would burn off by midday. The planet filled the viewport. Yara looked at it. Not the marble this time, not the star, not the point of light barely distinguishable from the other points of light. The whole thing, close enough now to see the cloud spiral over the ocean and the dark green mass of the continent below and the bright line where the atmosphere caught the sun. She looked at it. She had watched it get smaller on the way out, watched it until it was nothing she could distinguish from anything else. She had been doing that since Kepler, since the Cassini line, since every place she had gone out towards something that might kill her people. She could never stop herself watching. She had never let herself think about whether she'd watch it grow on the way back, because thinking about it was the wrong direction. Now she watched it grow. The cloud spiral, the dark green, the bright line. It grew the way things grew when you had been away from them, faster than you expected, and more than you remembered, and with a quality that had no name in any language she knew, that was not relief exactly, and not love exactly, but lived somewhere between them, and was both of them, and was also something else entirely. She watched it until the shuttle began its descent, and the viewport filled with the orange glow of atmospheric entry, and she couldn't see anything at all. She kept watching anyway. Wren's debrief was filed 11 days after the summit. It was classified at the highest level and would remain there for 25 years. It was a thorough document, 43 pages covering the contingency drawer from initial activation through final stand-down, including the positioning of every vessel, the timeline of every decision, the communications record from first transmission to last. On page 31, in a section covering personnel embedded on Verath Station, there was a line that noted 14 human crew members had maintained positions on the station for the duration of the summit under various cover roles. The next line noted that Concord Security had identified none of them. The line after that noted that this figure, 0 out of 14, was consistent with results from previous operations of similar type. Wren had written that last line in his usual flat, clinical style, the style he used for everything in a debrief, regardless of what the thing actually was. But he had looked at it for a long time before he moved on to page 32. 0 out of 14. He had not written what he thought about that, because a debrief was not the place for what he thought about things. A debrief was facts, sequence, outcome. The outcome was, they had gone in, they had meant it, they had been ready, and they had come home. All of them. That was the whole of it, really. Everything else was detail. Yara's official report to the Council ran to 60 pages and covered the summit in full. The diplomatic gains, the legal traps found and dismantled, the Vreth faction's move and the response, the final agreement and its terms. It was a good report, precise and honest and complete. The last paragraph was 3 sentences. The agreement reached at Verath Station is imperfect and workable and real. It was reached because we went in prepared to mean what we said, and ready for them not to. Both things were necessary. Neither one contaminated the other. She read it back once. Then she filed it and closed her terminal and sat for a moment in her office, which had the same view of the harbor it had always had, the same supply freighters moving through the channel slow and heavy with whatever they were carrying. She looked at the harbor. She thought about a brightness at the edge of visibility, a long way away, that she had not been able to name from where she stood, dying or being born. Both looked the same from far enough away. She thought about 6 of 14. She thought about the liaison office in its first week, with Kira Sane and her 3 simultaneous requests and her entirely steady hands. She thought about a man she had shared a room with for 30 seconds, in the last morning light before the shuttle left, who had looked like someone who had decided something and was living with what that decision required. She thought about both outcomes. Both things. No contradiction. Outside, a freighter moved through the harbor, slow and unhurried, carrying nothing interesting to nowhere important. She watched it until it was out of sight. Then she stood up, picked up her jacket, and went to find something to eat. She was very hungry. She had been hungry for days. She had been too busy to notice.